So I call it to order, and I'm looking for the consent agenda, which is, we have a town accountant's warrants. Right here.
I move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you,
Move
Madam
on to your
Chair. Cafe Nero is proposing to locate at the, in the space, the former toy shop on Walden Street. And the planning board, they've asked for a waiver of parking, for the parking requirements. The planning board will consider that on January 9th, and will make a recommendation to the Board of Appeals in time for their January 11th meeting. So that project seems to be moving forward. The Walden Rehab Facility at 748 Main Street is closed down. They've emptied
what
it.
is?
Walden
Rehab has closed. The property is, I think, up for sale, and the property may be sold, but they've shut off the water to that facility, so it's truly closed down. 1450 Main Street near Highland Street, Board of Health staff did some soils testing out there, and the soils tested fine.
Saw the
You saw the-
activity.
So they're still looking at 36 to 39 units in a PRD, which is based on a standard, the same number of units they could get in a standard subdivision, but using the land a little bit more creatively. The trustees of reservations, or the trustees, announced that they won't be building the larger visitor center at the old manse. Story was in the Globe, I guess, yesterday. They had contacted us late last week to let us know they had changed their plans. Third quarter tax bills will be mailed out this week. Some residents have contacted to ask if they can prepay this year's and maybe next year's property taxes, and you can pay the third and fourth quarter for the current fiscal year. You can't pay future fiscal years, for those that might be thinking of paying your taxes in advance. The light plant is in the process of converting residential customers from bi-monthly billing to monthly billing, and so far that's been going well. Dave Wood thought it might take 3 or 4 months to convert all 7,000 customers to monthly bills. And then lastly, the Harvey Wheeler roof tiles are being replaced. As you know, the work started last week, and they've made great progress, and I think it'll be about 2 more weeks, and that terracotta tiling roof will be replaced with something that looks very similar. So that's all I have.
Was there any follow-up on Punkatasset? Because I know that we had,
I had a meeting with Nora, stopped by to find out what's happening. I know she was suggesting that we proceed immediately to do the plowing, and we've agreed that we'll be plowing that area somewhat after the storm. Won't be the highest priority in the middle of the snowstorm, but after the storm ceases, either Public Works or Conservation, Nadelia will coordinate plowing out the vehicle spaces. And it's been proposed that the fog lines, so-called, be taped. I haven't. I sent an email to Rich Rain to ask if we could adhere. Could we do that? Apply that tape at this time of year? I think it might be a challenge. They try to put it down with heat typically, so it might be something that would have to wait till the warmer weather in the spring.
but we can try to implement the least cost,
Right, the low-cost alternatives.
options that will at least make it safe for the winter months,
Right.
so that we can see how it works.
Yes. Yep.
I gather there's gonna be some filming done tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I guess there's a British film company that's been filming a series, Castle Rock, and they've been around the state in different areas. Heather says they're out in the western Mass, but they're doing a shoot in front of the Concord prison.
And so I would think there might be some interesting calls sort of questioning what's going on there.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, they start early in the morning, I think, and just for one day.
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yeah. I hadn't heard about it before, but
A
they asked
family
for.
member applied to be an extra, or she
Oh.
auditioned for an extra. It's the only way. I just heard about it yesterday.
And do we know what the storyline is? Is it?
I don't.
I thought it was something to do with
it's-
capital punishment. and going in.
They're having protesters protest capital punishment, which doesn't take place.
Which doesn't happen in NCI, right?
I also have a question. I noticed that there's a CMLP charging station across from the library.
Yes, not operational yet. I think the
It
power.
was plugged in. So there was a plug.
I
So
saw
it
a
was plugged
car.
in to it.
Plug-
Yeah.
Well, they indicated that they were
You're
going to
gonna-
shut down the power in that area briefly in order to hook it up. So maybe I got that wrong, but
Well, somebody
anyway,
was
yeah.
charging.
But
At
that
least they
is-
were plugged in. And if they get back to their car and find
Well,
it didn't work.
Maybe we were taking the electricity from the car.
Maybe.
But it's
It's good to see that.
It'd be good. And very high-profile location.
Right in front of
That's
the
great.
public
Is
town.
there
Right.
others planned for the town?
There was talk of having one on Thoreau Street, but I'm not sure, in any of the depot, in the depot area.
We've talked
So,
about that.
And the Kites Road parking, I thought there was a possible
yeah,
installation.
possibly. That's been set up for that.
Great.
So I think when the lot gets resurfaced next spring, they
Then
will
we can
have.
put it in,
yeah.
right? Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, well, then, let's move on. We are postponing, well, we are gonna discuss the White Pond Advisory Committee charge at our January 8th meeting. That was a little premature to jump onto the agenda this week. So that puts us right into the 2018 annual town meeting warrant. And I think everybody's got it in front of them. We're gonna try and take on as much of this today as we
And,
can.
Carmen, I did invite Carmen Reese, she was here earlier in the day, so I guess we'll see what, if she comes. It's a little unusual for us to consider the layout of the warrant before the warrant closes. It closes on Thursday, January 4th, so we still have a few days. We think all the town departments and committees have submitted their articles, so it may be a handful of citizen petition articles might come in by the deadline. But I thought, because Heather Brissett in my office is new, and Laurel Landry had done it for 30 years, it might be good to get an early jump on discussions of where articles should be located, where should the zoning articles go, the budget, that we've got several marijuana-related articles. I imagine we want those put together.
Right.
And then where do you want the citizen petitions that we've received so far?
I think that for the town moderator, the question would be whether or not she would want to consider the marijuana articles collectively as sort of a high interest
She might,
item scheduled. I know she doesn't usually make that judgment until after the public hearings, but I would suspect that might occur.
yeah, that makes sense.
It makes sense to group them, even if it's not a high-interest article, just because they're all related in some way.
It'd be confusing if you spread them out.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
definitely clustered.
Yeah,
Okay.
So on the first page, this follows the traditional, we generally have tried to get the personnel matters taken care of early on, and then the budget for both the town and the schools. So by the close of the first day, ideally, we know that the operating budget has been approved or not. Let me mention that the new finance director, Carrie LaFleur, who's actually been here for almost a year and a half, on the revolving funds, she would like to suggest that we have a single article for several revolving funds, such as the pavement revolving fund, pavement repair revolving fund, which has been on by itself as a standalone article, typically on the consent calendar, but she wanted to add that with the CCTV, or I think that's separate. There's two articles in there
Yeah,
that she wanted to say, why have, 3 or 4 different articles on revolving funds when you could have them all combined, which she's accustomed to doing. in
so which
previous-
ones are we talking about
So
combining?
that's a good question. Article is that?
15, is it?
15 is a revolving fund.
Right,
the
but it
tree-
starts
the tree-
with
I think-
14.
Maybe the tree bylaw was one. Regional Housing Services, Road Repair Revolving Fund, and Tree Preservation. Those she suggested, instead of having 3 individual articles, have a single article.
You can do that?
Yeah. Other towns do. So that's one of the I don't know if the moderator will have an opinion on that, but there's another similar question that I have for you. The Articles 23 is appropriate funds for municipal capital projects. So on Article 23, I think we have 4 or 5 appropriation requests, such as the trail improvement, fire engine, parking lot construction, the library lighting, total of $5.1 million in capital spending. She's been accustomed to having a single article with individual presentations on each project or description of each project. And we haven't done it that way, so I think the community's used to hearing a presentation on fire engine, then a presentation on land purchase and individual projects. There are a few expenditures like the trail improvements at $75,000, the Harvey Wheeler parking lot at $100,000, and the lighting for the library at 150, which, are three kind of small projects that maybe we'd want to put those together. But so that's kind of like before the warrant deadline closes, like some guidance from you on whether you'd be comfortable having the revolving fund article include multiple, and the same thing with capital spending articles.
I know for certain budget items, you can call out an item, or like
So yes, so I'm sure.
five, and nobody objects to anything, you voted as one big package, but if somebody says, well, I don't think the fire engine's such a good idea.
Right.
Right, that they could have a
Pull it out.
specific discussion on that.
Right.
So that would be up to the moderator to decide. And we're talking about whether we could, instead of having multiple revolving fund authorization articles, could we have a single article to seek authorization for the tree bylaw revolving fund, the road repair revolving fund, and I've already forgotten what the other one was. There's a third one. So if somebody was okay with two of the three, but really wanted to talk about the tree preservation revolving fund, could we pull that out for discussion? Regional Housing Services was the third one.
Good evening, everybody. I wouldn't see any reason why we couldn't handle that much the way we do the consent calendar,
Yeah.
so that we can, either you in your presentation or I in discussing the article for town meeting would let everybody know everything that's in there. And then we would go through things one at a time and invite people to pull out anything they wished for further discussion. And we could vote the rest of it. I think that would be all
It's the
right.
same rules as you would use for the consent.
It is, yes, yeah.
And we're thinking, just as you came in, I was mentioning that we're thinking about doing the same thing for capital expenditures, the smaller capital expenditures, having multiple projects in one article instead of
Yes,
several smaller.
yeah. I think that's very sensible, and I think that the process we've been using for a number of years now for the consent calendar is one that's familiar to people. It works very well. There's been no difficulty if someone does want to pull something off of the consent calendar to effectively do that. And all in all, it still saves us a lot of time, and we direct our attention and time and energy to the things that people want to talk about, so it makes sense to me.
So I have only one question about that. It makes sense the way you just presented it. I believe you said that the tree preservation bylaw would be one. Tree preservation revolving fund. There is another warrant article that relates, it's a zoning article relating to how funds are collected for the tree preservation, under the tree preservation bylaw. Is there a reason that they ought to be taken up together? One is a refinement of the bylaw that actually states, I can't actually recall what the proposed language is for tree preservation bylaw amendments, but if someone wants to discuss those amendments, and we've already voted on the revolving fund budget, is that?
Is it in order?
Yeah. Conflict.
So I can't answer that question without looking more closely at those two. I haven't seen those two articles, so I don't know what they look like. I think that if you felt and if you discussed with town council and town council's recommendation were that you do pull the tree revolving fund out so that it can be addressed with the bylaw amendment, that's an easy fix. You can certainly do that. Yeah, and that could be a thing that you either do before the warrant goes to the printer, or if we discover it through conversation with town council that it really, or through the hearing process, that it really needs to be pulled out, then we would pull it out before deliberation at town meeting.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know where you are in your agenda. Do you want me to stay here or come back?
We're right in the middle of the warrant.
Stays.
Right there.
Perfect, okay.
Timing was
Apologies for being late.
The other issue that we talked about before the moderator came in was clustering the marijuana articles, which there look to be three. And also the potential likelihood of you deciding that will be a high-interest article. But I know you don't make that
Right.
until later, but.
So I think that it makes a lot of sense to cluster those articles, and I will tell you that for independent reasons, because we were reviewing the use of electronic voting at Acton's special town meeting a week or two ago. I happened to attend the special town meeting in Acton where they took up these three issues.
Oh, they did.
And they did cluster them together, and it made a lot of sense. I think it was very clear that the same constituency had arrived to talk about those three things. They stayed for those three things, and then they had some other things that were of high interest there as well. But and I had a question actually about one of these. Does the ban, does that require a vote at the polls afterwards?
Yes.
Yes, I thought so. So then you're absolutely going to want to have a vote on all three of these things, because even if the ban passes at town meeting, you don't know what will happen at the polls. So I'm sure that the planning board will want to move their extension of the moratorium.
And the
in any
same with
event.
the tax one,
Yes,
just as a
Right.
hedge, we don't know.
right, because you don't know exactly how people are going to come out on this, so you may as well do all three. But I think that the discussion on each may influence how people feel about the others, and so it just makes a lot of sense to put them all together.
And is there any particular order? I think she doesn't, Heather doesn't have them clustered together now, so she has the sales tax provision is Article 19, unless I'm looking at an older.
It was 1931 and 42.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so, and,
I guess I had a couple of thoughts about ordering. I don't know, is this the right time for me to mention them? So that was one that I thought that we ought to cluster those three. And it seems to me that it probably makes sense to cluster them around Article 31. So that maybe you would put Article 19 before 31 and Article 42 after 31. So that those three would go in that order.
Okay.
Some other thoughts that I had, Article 54, it looks like this had been a citizen petition, and it looks like the select board will move it. Is this reducing?
not a citizen petition. It has been suggested in a number of different locations. This would be to accept a new statute that says that throughout the community, we would post signs at the entrance to town that in Concord, the speed limit is 25 miles an hour unless otherwise posted. So
Okay.
the speed restrictions on Lowell Road, for example, it's posted at 40 miles an hour. That would be the applicable speed law. But if there's no sign posted, it would be thickly settled, so-called, as dropped from 30 to 25.
Right. So the way this is drafted, that article would come last. And if it passes, this is an article that will have a broad impact on people. This is obviously your decision, and I appreciate your giving me an opportunity to give you my 2 cents on it, but I'm not sure that I would wish to put an article that will impact everybody driving in Concord in their daily lives last on the warrant. It's a bit of a sleeper, and by its title, I don't think that people necessarily understand what it will do. So I would just suggest to you, you might want to put that somewhere else. Perhaps you would put it immediately after the marijuana cluster.
So,
That's a good point.
Another, or perhaps you would want to put it immediately after the alcohol beverage bylaw amendment, which makes a certain amount of sense because those are both bylaws proposed by the select board,
Or if
by
we
the
would,
town
even though
manager.
it's not a citizen petition, we might cluster it with those other citizen petitions in the sense that they have broad impact and get them put together and also get them all not late in the game a
Right.
little bit.
So, 46 and 47, once 54 moves, the the likelihood is that most, if not all, of the enterprise funds will end up on the consent agenda. We had 2 or 3 of them off the consent agenda last year.
On purpose, sort of.
Well, 2 on purpose and then a third.
By request. The third was by request.
But the third was by request. So this year, I would imagine that we might pick a 4th that wasn't off the agenda last year and have it off the agenda.
Focus on it, right.
And again, depending on what the reaction is from the general public at the hearings, if they seem uncontroversial and much the way they have been at other years, then there might be one of those that is debated by town meeting, and that would leave the leaf blower bylaw as another article which, if it passes, will have a broad impact on pretty much everybody, at least everybody whose gardener uses a leaf blower or who uses one themselves. And again, I'm not sure you want to have it that close to the end of the meeting. I guess the other theory is that if you put it there, it will make people stay to the other end of the meeting. And I do know that something has to go last. But that was just a thought I had in passing. I know that the issues surrounding dog walking have been very controversial and have attracted a lot of interest and discussion town-wide. This one, first of all, I think Article 46, I think that's going to have to be 2 articles based on what I've seen. I think that I think it's going to have to be 2 petitions because they're different. I don't think you can wrap the 2 things the petitioner wishes to do into 1 article. It would be 2 articles.
I haven't seen the language.
I have seen the language.
Just the preview, she.
Yes.
had
She was still,
Changing
No
the
idea
language
what-
of
She
what
was still
passive
working on it. So and she hasn't submitted it yet, I don't believe, and so it could still change. The draft I've seen is requesting 2 things. One is amending the open space and recreation plan to specifically include dog walking as a passive recreation
Passive, yeah.
activity.
She did mention that.
That's one. And the other one is to direct, or I have suggested to urge, the Natural Resources Commission to adopt a moratorium on any changes that they're currently thinking about until they do some data collection. And those 2 things are different enough that I don't think you can put them in one warrant article. I think
I
they
don't
need to
think
be
they
2.
can direct the natural resource.
No, I think they can urge.
They can urge.
Yes. Yes. Yes, there'll be a question for town council about amending the open space and recreation plan. I'm not sure whose authority that is. There's a statutory requirement that we do that periodically. I don't remember who does it. Is it the recreation?
It's NRC, in
it's the
collaboration,
NRC.
in collaboration
Okay.
with
so
the
they're both,
Recreation
that's
Commission.
probably why they've been clustered at this point, because they're both
Okay.
NRC.
Well, you know what? If they're both actions by the NRC, then I guess it's all right to put them in 1 article. I had been thinking that they would require action by 2 different entities. So it might be all right to put them,
Again,
But they're both
if
direct actions. One is to change the language, definition of passive recreation, that's one thing.
Right.
And the other is to then urge the NRC
Right.
to hold off on issuing its regs or rules for dog walking until they collect data.
It makes for a more confusing vote
Yeah.
for town meeting, because you could certainly have people who are in favor of one of those things and not the other, and then they can't figure out how to vote on the article, or maybe they move to amend the article, and it might be better if they were separated in terms of clarity. But that's a choice for the petitioner, I think. I don't think there's anything that dictates that it needs to be separate articles. But because those are fundamentally advisory actions that town meeting would be taking and not actual changes, there's probably less of a sleeper potential that something that makes a big difference in the lives of everybody who wasn't paying attention happens at the tail end of town meeting.
So you're suggesting that maybe leaving it generally where it is on the order would be.
I think that would be all right. You might want to leave leaf blowers.
Well,
Move leaf blowers,
don't
pardon
we
me.
don't we have a meeting after the warrant closes?
You, on January 8th?
Where we would-
Yes, you will have
Yes.
you will have the opportunity to
Yeah.
finalize that. Yep.
Yeah, that's,
That's true. It might be easier to make these decisions when you've actually seen the warrant
And we
articles.
don't know we know what the committees and boards warrants are going to be, I think,
Right.
pretty much, but we still are
Don't know what the
uncertain
citizen
about
petition is.
citizen
Yep.
petitions.
Yep.
So, I mean, your points are well taken in the sense that anything that broadly affects the citizens of town ought not to be left to the tail
tail
end.
end.
I have very bad memories of leaving the dog bylaw to the last article.
I
We
do
all
too.
remember that.
Yes, that was a terrible mistake, and a lot of people put a lot of hard work into that, and it was a terrible disappointment to see the whole thing not really get a vote. So that was
But
too
you don't
bad.
make your consent calendar decisions until after public hearings, right?
Absolutely, right, right. I had another question for you. I see that there are two community preservation articles here that look like they are planning board articles. Oh, no, Finance Committee, pardon me. So 26 and 27, one of them is the Community Preservation Act Undesignated Reserves Fund, and the other one is Community Housing Fund. Is either of those the CPC appropriation recommendations? Every other year, we've called them the
Right.
CPC appropriation recommendations, so I didn't know whether the name of that article had gotten changed and it's one of those, or whether we're missing the CPC appropriation recommendations.
I don't know the answer to that, so I will check on that.
Because I know I don't remember when I recall hearing this, but I do remember hearing about an undesignated reserve action and a community housing action.
Right. I saw-
Separate of.
Right,
So-
so I think we're
Yeah, I
missing
think
the
we're
main
missing-
appropriation article.
Thank
Good
you.
catch.
But we still have three?
So then we have.
Yeah,
three.
because there was unspent funds in a housing project and so it's
Right.
relatively small amounts of money. These articles were put into the reserve.
So we would basically have what would, a placeholder is 27A, which is CPC funding
Yeah.
expenditures.
Right.
And I have one further thought, which would be a break with tradition, but is something that often happens anyway, and that is moving the Minuteman budget to be before the CPS budget, because the Minuteman person is sometimes an administrator from Minuteman, or sometimes it is our school committee representative to Minuteman, and that person often has a hard time waiting till the very end of the first night of town meeting, and I think that we have enough meat on these town and school articles this year that we can expect it to be well into the
Robust.
evening before we get to the Minuteman budget. So it would be a break with tradition to put Minuteman before the Concord Public School budgets, but I just offer you that as a thought. It would
So
really
would
be
you
an
suggest putting it
accommodation.
between the town and the schools?
Yes,
After the town, before the school.
Yes.
So it'd become 9. so-
Yep.
so I think that's all of my
Great.
thoughts. And
That's helpful.
I always have a terrible time keeping track of what the new numbers are once you've shuffled the deck like this.
And it's also the case, I'm not speaking for the board here, but I'm just, I guess, articulating. There are still a couple of articles on here that were submitted by town committees that I'm not sure
Will stay.
board that they will stay. So there might be some articles under that the select board's not gonna go for.
Okay,
So they might get some pruning.
well, I'll stay tuned then.
And let me see, one question we had was on the hearings, for the Article 29 and 30 is currently numbered, it concerned 22, 29 Main Street. And one is to appropriate funds to do some planning for the future use of that property, and the second one is to discuss acquisition of the property. And I don't know if you have a strong opinion. The money appropriation typically would go to the FinCom. The acquisition, perhaps for $1, would normally be a select board hearing.
Right.
Where it could get into some detail on the pros and cons of that acquisition that have nothing to do with finance and finance committee matters.
Right.
So do you have, this has happened in the past where we have two
No, I
related
think it's
articles.
appropriate, although those happen to be two of the articles I was just
Yeah.
speaking about. But I think it's
Okay.
appropriate for 29 to be assigned to the FinCom.
Okay.
That's the one with acquisition, I mean,
No,
with
no, 29
funds.
is the.
appropriation of funds.
Appropriation of-
Redevelopment planning is
Well, it's
29.
appropriation of funds.
Yep.
Oh.
So
So that
that's
should
the
be
one that would
FinCom,
go-
and the other one should be Select Board. And you're okay that somebody that wants to hear that conversation would have to go out two different meetings, a week apart, to talk on that subject? We've had to deal with this in the past, I don't remember what the
I'm
topic
not
was.
sure I agree with that, that would be a FinCom. We have put articles on here under the town manager, the select board, that have funding items attached to them. Since these two are closely tied, we already had one vote at town meeting 2015, that, to acquire the property at 2229 Main. Now we have one article here that would be setting aside money to decide what we're gonna do with the land, should we acquire it. That's more, I think, the planning issues, and it is a finance issue, really.
Right.
And we're not talking about a huge sum of money. It seems appropriate for. it
What
to
was
be
the
a sum.
amounts that they are, did they have an amount?
$100,000.
How much?
100,000.
100,000.
Or I think they suggested less. They
Right,
said
25.
25,000.
25, and I think we
My,
all
sug-
said-
I get Alice's
Hire a
point, but
consultant.
my suggestion would be, why don't we don't have to decide the hearing now.
Right.
So, because I want to discuss these two
Yeah,
articles.
so do I.
Right.
And after we've had a discussion, we might learn that they are really intertwined, or they can be separate, whatever.
Okay. No, that's true.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and the two articles I put on for your consideration were the alcohol amendment to the bylaw, which has been in place since the 70s, I think. But when the Jazz Festival came up, there was an interest in having beer for sale in the Kais Road parking lot, and right now that would not be permitted. Also, 51 Walden and Emerson Umbrella are town-owned buildings where alcohol is sold because they're leased by third parties. So you've issued liquor licenses to 51 Walden and Emerson Umbrella, and it's technically not in conformance with the bylaw. So we should either change the bylaw
So
or...
Fix the bylaw.
So that's why Steve mentioned it earlier, so
Yep.
you do want to make sure that you
We
affirmatively...
did wind up serving alcohol at the Jazz Festival, didn't we?
Under a
Did-
tent
the
on the
bank?
Middlesex.
Oh, was it on somebody else's property? I think,
Bank, I think, had a
Yeah, the
little
Middlesex Bank hosted us,
Oktoberfesty kind of,
right, but
Tent.
we had to,
but it was a workaround, it was on somebody else's
yeah, well,
property.
Let's get it fixed.
Okay.
fixed.
So those are all the questions I had also.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to see you all.
Thanks, Carmen.
Thanks, Tony.
okay. So we've got some reordering to start with. Any other comments from the board?
I do have a question with respect to petition articles. When the petitioners submit the articles, are they also submitting them with signatures?
Yes,
So
yes.
that they're,
And the town clerk has to certify that the signatories are registered voters in the town. Which has been done for the petition articles that you see, I think.
they've all come in with,
So what I'd like to see, and I'll be willing to, write my little edits to this, is a little more clarity on what, in the table of contents, so we know what the articles are about. I feel some of them are a little bit
Not self-explanatory.
obtuse
Yep.
for a common viewer, somebody who's reading it says, zoning law amendment, height. So,
Okay.
we could use, a couple more words in there about what kind of height are we thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
I think this would pertain to accessory buildings at the side and rear property lines, I think. So I think that would help somebody understand that this is an article they'd have an interest in following. There might be others in here as well.
Like the historic districts amendments, Hubbardville, or,
Hubbardville, it should say expand Hubbardville Historic
Right,
District.
like something.
Which it's just adding.
Hubbardville is an unknown for many.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, district.
So any suggestions you have, you're right, because of the index I find very helpful to quickly get,
Yeah,
to locate
yeah.
where the items are, but it'd be wise if they were
So
self-explanatory.
I'll take a look and see if I can, the ones that I don't understand, that I'll offer some
Great,
corrected language.
thank you.
I don't know which meeting, but the articles where the warrants were handed out, so that,
I think I did take those, but I'll borrow yours, because you've
Yes.
got them here. Thank you.
Great. So that was, all I had was just give me a heads up if there was anything in this list that you don't want to see on there. You can discuss that on January 8th also.
Right, but this is just a preview.
And then on the order, particularly, you might think about the zoning. I guess it'll be easier when you have all the articles and you know what you have. But, in the past, we've struggled not to have zoning be the last thing, and nobody stays around for that.
Well, zoning bylaws, or zoning bylaw changes by the planning board are the one class of articles that can't be rejected from the warrant.
You have to include them on the
Under
warrant. And-
petition articles.
Correct.
Steve, I know it's unfair to put you on the spot, but are there any things that jumped out on the
Not at all. Sorry, my tardiness. It's the highest form of arrogance. It's table of contents. I mean, I think it's pretty standard form, so not an issue.
Well, with that, I think we're ready to adjourn to executive session. Oh, I'm sorry. Apologize. Yep. Public
me,
comments? I don't know why I was overlooking.
Corey, did you want to see if we can clear out a few liaison reports
Oh.
or stuff like that, so we can?
Yeah, but I thought we'd take public comments first and then go to liaison reports. And I apologize.
No apology necessary. Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road. I speak for the League of Women Voters, and just want to remind people coming back on January, very soon after we all return from holidays and various vacations, on Thursday, January 11th, featuring Mr. Mike Lawson. He will be talking about mapping the road to town meeting, how it works and how to work it, advocacy and public hearings. This is the second in a formal series of sessions, the third in a more informal draw, which started with the town moderators gathering. The second was how to construct a warrant article. This is about how to advocate for and move an article forward, which will be very important for anyone wanting to attend the public hearings, which Concord so, I think, effectively presents to its citizens. So that's Thursday, January 11th at 7:30 to 9 at the Harvard Wheeler Community Center.
this will also be on CCTV?
It will also be recorded by CCTV, as were the first two, so that people interested in pursuing a knowledge of that information over the next few years will have access to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Any other public comments? All right, then, should we move to liaison reports? Mr. Lawson,
Why don't we do
please.
that? So I have two very, just announcements before many of us attended the opening of Karma on Wednesday. It was very nice. It was very exciting. They had dragons and firecrackers, or I don't know what they were,
That's a
but
good
loud
time.
noises.
The lion dance.
We missed you.
I caught up with them that night.
Did you? And I would report I've been in there 3 more times since then to check out. So they're doing,
Make
seem
sure
to be,
they're maintaining
seem to
the
be doing
standard.
very well.
Good energy.
Also, as you know, we passed a proclamation celebrating the 36 years of Country Kitchen, and I walked that over there and read it to them on Friday the 15th.
that's
It was
great.
really cute.
Yeah.
I just walked in, but one of the town's police officers was there, and we sort of shoved everybody into this tiny space, and he said, "A police emergency." And then I read the proclamation, so I think they were greatly appreciative of.
Is that part of the Stop and Shop property?
Yeah, it is.
It is, yeah.
And I thought I heard that Crosby was going to take it over and keep it as a turkey sandwich
Very
stand,
good.
but I don't know if that's gone through.
I guess we'll hear about it later, when it comes back to us.
So I have two real liaison reports. Important committee meetings. I attended the combined school meeting at which the primary subject was the budget juxtaposed against the guideline from the town, and there still is a rather significant gap, so work to do there, but it was a very thorough discussion presented by the superintendent, and so that's moving ahead. I also attended, and so too did Alice, the Concord Municipal Light Plant meeting, in which they were beginning to talk about their rate regulations that they're going to be talking about, and also a commercial net metering. So changes in commercial net metering that's being proposed. I think it was proposed by Mr. Fold, but I think the light plant has some interest in seeing what can be done about that. So there was two pretty important hearings or two important meetings on those two.
Could I add to that? I believe they also set a date of January 11th as their next public forum on.
That's correct.
On their strategic plan, the CMO.
That would be in the morning, not to conflict
Yeah,
with the
it's in the
rates
morning.
and Mr. Lawson's.
Yeah. So that was pretty important.
I have two. One, the Disability Committee, the Assistant Town Manager, Kate, came and gave a presentation, and I think the people very much appreciated that. And there was kind of a good discussion about training that's been going on within the town to deal with issues involving disability. And they're continuing on issues such as accessibility, and perhaps trying to put something together for the visitor center in terms of a map that would help to locate where handicap parking might be, where handicap bathrooms, and which are various activities are handicap accessible. And then we had the first meeting of the dog park feasibility study, and they elected, the chair will be Ann Humphrey, the clerk is Don Shobles, and they set up the next couple of meetings. There'll be a meeting on January the 3rd and a meeting on January the 17th. And they've already communicated with the planning board, Marcia, regarding coming in, and they're putting together some questions that they'd like to have her address, such as which areas in Concord might be available and which might be coming available. So they're off to a quick start. They don't have a lot of time, so we'll see how quickly something can be put together, but they seem a very energized group, so I think it'll work out very well.
Great. And I know that not everybody came prepared to discuss their liaison reports, so if that's it,
Can I make two more quick comments?
Yes,
Our
you may.
Financial Audit Advisory Committee meeting, which was going to be this week, needed to be postponed until January because the reports weren't ready, I think, from the auditor, so that's been postponed. And I have scheduled the first meeting of the Pollinator Committee on, we don't have the committee fully staffed yet, but we do now have a majority.
We have a quorum.
So we have a quorum, so it's scheduled for the 28th at
Of January?
December.
December,
We're trying to get a meeting in before that. So,
before the tax bill passes?
before,
I got just real quick, few things. You guys have been receiving links and information on the 2229 Main Street Committee. I think they've been very, it's good. They're really aggressive and pushing that opportunity to us, but, you know, we're definitely pursuing our responsibilities of managing the risk of that situation. And also the Affordable Housing Funding Committee, they've been doing great work, asking wonderful questions, talking to all the right people about, you know, how revenue is raised, you know, spent, allocated, all the legislation involved, if there's a fee structure, you know, and I think we've talked about free cash and all the options, but I think they understand the process. I was kind of giving them the timeline of the opportunities for this town meeting. You know, they're probably leaning towards something of just extending their charge. I don't think they would be able to develop a strategy or a proposal that would be vetted. But I think the FinCom folks who were in attendance, you know, really did appreciate all their work and probably felt the same. So we got to take our little, the committee has to go on the road and probably visit with CHDC and not just the how, but, well, where we'll raise the funding, but how we spend the funding as well is probably more important than where it comes from, so.
I would just say, I read the minutes, and I was very impressed by, first of all, how thorough and direct the minutes were, and the fact that they have the minutes all of the last 3 meetings, and they're really excellent. It looks like they're really doing
Very
a great
good group,
job.
yeah, good group. of
Yeah,
people.
I've had personal feedback from some of the members of the group on how excited they are with their charge.
Good, that's good, good to hear.
Great. Okay. Have I missed anything else before we seek to adjourn?
Would you like a motion? Man?
I would like a motion.
I move to adjourn to executive session for the purpose of discussing litigation strategy, not to return to open session.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.